1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden to discuss a trio of trades that involve talented top four defenders. But before we get to that, let's start with the bombshell that was dropped in Minnesota. The Wild bought out the final 4 years of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter's matching 13-year, $98 million contracts. Parise had the lowest point total in a decade with 18 points in 45 games. He averaged the lowest ice time since his rookie season 15 years ago at just under 14 minutes per game. And he was a healthy scratch at times as well. He was pretty vocal about his disappointment with his new role. He seemed to embrace the chance to play elsewhere immediately. The same, though, cannot be said for Suter. The reliable defender saw his ice time drop to 22 minutes a game this season, but he still had the third highest ice time among Wild skaters. He scored 19 points in 56 games. And frankly, his buyout came as a huge surprise. According to an article in The Athletic, Suter was so upset upon hearing the news that he hung up on Wild GM Bill Guerin, and you can bet he's going to be heavily pursued in free agency because he's still a really great defender. Personally, Steele, I was floored when I heard Suter was bought out, but the writing was kind of on the wall with Parise. What was your reaction when you heard the news?
Yeah, it was super tough for me. And, those two guys were a big reason why I became a Minnesota Wild fan in the first place. And then just a couple years later when they added Eric Staal and Devin Dubnyk as well, just solidified them for them being my second favorite team behind the Toronto Maple Leafs. But it was really tough to see. And obviously, like you said, I think with Zach Parise, it was we all saw this coming, but it was a shocking surprise to see Ryan Suter in there as well, getting bought out with Parise. So for me, it was a little tough, but it's one era coming to an end and a new one beginning. I think the Minnesota Wild know that they're really close to becoming one of the top teams in the NHL right now, and they're looking to sign guys like Kirill Kaprizov. So I think this gives them a lot of room to negotiate with him. Obviously, he rejected their last offer at around $8 million for 8 years. He's looking up for a shorter term deal. So I think with this freeing up some cap space for them, this really lets them get really into the free agency this season, as well as signing some of those young guys they have, like Kirill Kaprizov, like I just mentioned. But to Ryan Suter and Zach Parise, like you said, I think there are going to be a lot of teams looking for these guys, especially Ryan Suter. And one of the teams that I heard mentioned around for Zach Parise was the New York Islanders. I think that would be a great fit for Parise, as well as the Islanders, getting those veteran guys that can lead by example, as well as fit in those roles that they need to fit in, which Zach Parise was put in this year by the Minnesota Wild. But Ryan Suter, like you said, he was brought down a couple of minutes for his ice time this season. I think that was really beneficial for him, just because of him aging, being on the older side. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams looking for both Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. And yeah, I think, like I said, they're just looking for the near future, and they're really close to becoming one of the top teams in the NHL right now. So I think it was the right move for the Minnesota Wild to buy out the last 4 years of both of those contracts.
I think the Islanders make a ton of sense for Parise. There's been a lot of talk about him wanting somebody that's familiar. Obviously, Lou Lamoriello was there in New York after being in New Jersey, of course, where Parise was before Minnesota. And then his dad, JP Parise, actually played for New York as well. So that would be kind of cool just to come around full circle and see him in an Islanders uniform next season. And of course, Ryan Suter, like we said, there's got to be at least a dozen teams who are going to be begging him to sign there. He's probably going to have a lot of options, and one which we will get to a little bit later in this episode, because a lot of defensemen around the league have been on the move. Now, I completely understand Suter being upset, especially with it being his hometown team. Obviously, he pictured himself playing the rest of his career there. But at the end of the day, this move came down to two things: money and expansion. The savings are significant up front, and they're minimal down the line. Minnesota will save $10.3 million against their cap this upcoming season, $2.3 million next year, $300,000 from 2023 to 2025, and then it will actually cost Minnesota $1.7 million against the cap from 2025 to 2029. But of course, Bill Guerin probably isn't that concerned about that. He's worried about right now. Some of those guys that you mentioned, of course, Kaprizov, Kevin Fiala. There's a lot of guys that they want to get under contract, and really it's the next few years in Minnesota that I think Guerin is focused on here most. So maybe the more important aspect of this, though, is that it frees up 2 more protection spots for the Wild to use ahead of the expansion draft. Minnesota would have been forced to protect both Parise and Suter unless they waive their no-move clauses. The one strange thing about this story is they were reportedly not asked to waive those clauses. I don't think Parise was getting dealt anywhere. Nobody was taking on that cap hit the way he had played. But I think Suter, maybe there was a chance he could have got moved somewhere if the Wild retained some of that cap space. Either way, too late for that. Both of these players have been bought out. But now to be able to protect Matt Dumba, that's huge for this franchise. And while it definitely hurts the fans to see 2 fan favorites jettisoned out of town, if Guerin can get some of these young guys signed, like you mentioned, this is a whole new era for the Wild. And I think at least fans that way will know the money was well spent. So do you think in the end, this is going to be worthwhile for Minnesota, even though it hurts right now?
It's totally worth it because, like you said, they're able to protect Matt Dumba now. And this expansion draft, like we saw with the biggest one, is going to be crucial for all of these teams, who they protect or who they leave for Seattle to pick up in the process. So I think with them able to actually protect Matt Dumba now, because we've seen over the last couple of years where Matt Dumba was on the table, where he could have gotten dealt at the trade deadline as well. So I think now that they're able to secure him and protect him from this expansion draft, as well as one other player from the forwards as well, it really benefits the Minnesota Wild. Like I said, this is a new era for the Minnesota Wild. They truly believe, I think a lot of people believe now, that they're going to be one of the best teams in the NHL moving forward if they can sign those guys like Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala, like they did with Joel Eriksson earlier this week, signing him to an 8-year contract. So it opens up a lot of room for money, opens up a lot of room in their lineup for these young guys. And I think it was totally worth it. Even though it sucks right now, it's what they need. It's what needed to be done for the future.
Absolutely. I'll just finish it up by saying I do think it's fair to question maybe, especially the Suter moves, some of the things that apparently didn't get tried or didn't get done. But at the end of the day, I think Guerin has earned the benefit of the doubt. Overall, when you look at all of the moves he's made in entirety, he really seems to have a great vision for this team. More of the moves that he's made than not have ended up being the correct one. And I think that's how we're going to look back at this a year or two down the road, especially if he gets those young guys signed for the foreseeable future. Let's move on to 3 very similar trades ahead of the expansion draft that saw 3 talented defensemen traded. Let's start with one that's a little different from the other 2, and that's Edmonton's acquisition of Duncan Keith, sending the Blackhawks defenseman Caleb Jones and a conditional 3rd-round pick. That pick becomes a 2nd-rounder if the Oilers make it all the way to the Cup final, and Keith is among their top 4 defenders in ice time. Now, Keith is 38 years old. He's got 2 years left on his contract with a cap hit of $5.54 million. And somewhat surprisingly, Chicago retained no salary in this deal. Keith's play has suffered recently, but he's still a capable NHLer. He's got great leadership skills, experience, of course, 3-time Cup winner, Olympic gold medalist, winner of 2 Norris trophies, and a Conn Smythe. How would you grade this deal for each side, Steele?
For each side, I'm going to give it a B- both to Chicago and Edmonton. And I think for Edmonton, this is just going to be a huge gamble for them. Duncan Keith has progressively gotten worse and worse over the last years when we're talking about point production. It's just, like you said, he's 38 years old over the last years. He just hasn't been up to par when you over the last years with the Chicago Blackhawks. So I think this is a big gamble for the Edmonton Oilers. And I think they did this because they're pretty sure about where Oscar Klefbom stands with his injuries and where he could potentially be in the next few years as well. They're fairly certain that he won't be returning for this season coming up. So they needed to fill that gap with Oscar Klefbom on the IR for long term. So I think that was kind of the decision they made. They needed to get a veteran, experienced defenseman to kind of fill that gap with all of these young defensemen that they've been using over the last 2 years. So it's a bit of a gamble, but it needed to be done. but Edmonton still has a lot to improve over this offseason. They need to adjust their goalie situation. They need to adjust their bottom six forward cores. So it's not just Duncan Keith. There's going to be a lot of additions for the Edmonton Oilers over in the next week and a half coming up to free agency as well as this expansion draft. So I think for the Edmonton Oilers, it was a bit of a gamble, but it had to be done. So I'm giving both the teams a B-, and I'm giving Chicago the B- just because they got that second round pick there as well.
We agree on a lot of things. Our grades are a little bit different, but I do want to kind of expand on a couple of things I said that you said that I think are absolutely bang on. It's a steep price for Edmonton, and despite their difficulty attracting free agents, I know they're under pressure here to win with McDavid and Draisaitl in their prime right now. I would have liked to see them hold firm unless Chicago retained some of that salary. Keith wanted out of Chicago. I don't think they wanted to keep him there long term. As much as the fans love him, as much as he's done for that franchise, his play just hasn't matched the amount of money that it's costing them against the cap right now. And I think if Edmonton waited just a little bit longer, they could have got Chicago to retain some of that salary. And cap space is going to be key for the Oilers because, like you said, there are holes up and down this lineup. It's not like plugging in a third or fourth defenseman, which you're getting in Keith, an overqualified third defenseman. But let's be honest, he's a second pair guy right now. That's not going to fix all the problems that you have in Edmonton. They have to address a ton of needs right now. And just having that huge salary for the next 2 years, that's going to make it even more difficult for them. On the other side, Caleb Jones gives the Blackhawks the inside track to trade for and retain his older brother, Seth Jones, or even just sign him outright at the end of next season if they want to wait that longer. And listen, maybe Caleb Jones doesn't fit as well with the Oilers' timeline right now. I completely understand that, but I actually think he has top four upside. He has only 19 points in 93 NHL games, but he had 40 points in his last 64 AHL games, and he is on a dirt cheap deal right now. The Blackhawks had no leverage, so to me, they won this deal big. A solid A for Chicago and a C+ for Edmonton. However, before the Oilers fans kill me here, I want to say that I hope Keith proves me wrong because I'd love to see the Oilers succeed. Even if they're able to win 2 playoff rounds, let's say, get to the third round, let alone the Stanley Cup final, which is a condition on this swap. If they're able to get to the Western Conference final, I think this is a win for them. So, that grade could look a little bit silly, but I just think Chicago came out of this looking fantastic based on what they had going into it, which was no leverage. Let's move on now to the New Jersey Devils. They made a big play to improve next season, acquiring the imposing 6'5", 220-pound Ryan Graves from Colorado, and they sent back forward Mikhail Maltsev and the 61st pick in the upcoming draft. Maltsev projects to battle for the Avalanche's fourth-line center spot, so this was definitely a move made by Avalanche GM Joe Sakic, just because he didn't want to lose Graves in the expansion draft. So this one makes a little bit more sense to me for both sides than the Duncan Keith deal. Graves immediately becomes New Jersey's best defenseman today, and he should remain a top 2 or top 3 guy in that lineup for years to come. As some of the Devils, good, promising young defensive prospects get a little bit better. And what I really like is his defensive game should give some protection to a guy like Ty Smith or Damon Severson. How did you grade this one out, Steele?
Yeah, I think New Jersey actually won this deal. And I'm going to give the New Jersey Devils an A- and the Colorado Avalanche a B. And I think this, even though this is probably tough news for Ryan Graves going from one of the best teams to one of the worst teams in the NHL, I think this really might benefit his game. I think, like you said, he's going to bring that tough grittiness to a very, very young team, probably the youngest team in the NHL right now, as well as he's going to see a lot more ice time. So I think for his game specifically, it's going to really benefit him. And just joining this young team as well as a young guy himself, this is going to be really beneficial for him. I give the New Jersey Devils an A- and the Colorado Avalanche a B, just because of them as well acquiring that late second round, early third round pick.
Yeah, I think New Jersey definitely got the better end of this deal. It was better than the alternative for Colorado. I can't really dog them for making this move. It really would have hurt if they lost Graves for nobody, and if they replace his spot with somebody like Ryan Suter or another defenseman, maybe they flip this second round pick for another guy, then to me it becomes an even better trade on Colorado's side. But one thing that I think really pushes it in New Jersey's direction is Graves' contract. He is signed for the next 2 seasons at a cap hit of just $3.17 million. I honestly think at that salary, he's worth a first rounder to a contending team with cap issues. So A+ to New Jersey for me. I think if they're not able to turn it around next season, they might be able to flip Graves for even more than what they paid for him the following year ahead of the trade deadline. Still, kind of like you, a solid B for Colorado for me, since I think a second rounder or depth forward is pretty good return when, you know, you're faced with losing him for absolutely nothing. Let's finish off with the New York Islanders sending Nick Leddy to Detroit for the Red Wings second round pick, which is 52nd overall in the upcoming draft, and forward Richard Panik. Detroit is also retaining half of Panik's $2.75 million contract, and that runs through 2022-23. Leddy will cost Detroit $5.5 million against the cap next season, and he's actually a pending UFA. So similar to Graves in New Jersey, I think Leddy immediately becomes Detroit's best defenseman, but I think New York also did really well in this trade. Rather than losing Leddy to expansion, Panik, solid fourth line guy. At half his salary, I actually think he's a really good deal, and I like this a little bit better for the Islanders, who I'd give a B+. Detroit, they should be happy adding a guy like Leddy into their lineup, so I'd give them a B. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm exactly there with you. I'd give them the exact same grades. The Islanders a B+, and Detroit Red Wings a B. I think this is great for both sides, and Detroit just keeps adding more and more veteran experience on their blue line. So I think for them, Yzerman knows exactly what he's doing. He's in complete control of this team, and he's taking them in the right direction. And then for the New York Islanders, that second round pick with Richard Panik is also, it's not bad. And Richard Panik, this is his second team in his 10 NHL career. So Panik can be a solid fourth liner. He had one decent year with the Chicago Blackhawks where he had 44 points, but other than that, he's not a special guy. He's not very talented. So I think he can be a great fourth liner, as well as them acquiring that second round pick. Like we talked about, I think we're going to see this a lot. We're going to see a lot from teams this season because of this expansion draft. They don't want to let guys go for nothing, so they're going to look for something to get in return for guys who are UFAs. And I think this was a great deal for both teams. And like you said, B+ and B for both those teams.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode, but make sure you keep it locked on our channel for what continues to be a busy offseason. We're going to have plenty to discuss this summer, including the Seattle Kraken's expansion draft and the NHL entry draft just a couple days later. On behalf of Steel Roden, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.